Hi folks, welcome to the Ask the Arb podcast. Today I'm delighted to have Roy Partington from Greenfix onto the podcast. So Greenfix, they're an interesting company. They provide a wide range of soil stabilisation and erosion control solutions. However, in relation to our listeners, they're probably best known for their porous cellular confinement systems. Now, some of you will have been on the receiving end of the specification of using a GeoGrid or a Geoweb as a means for bridging across trees, root protection areas to get in things like driveways or bases for sheds and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not an expert on this stuff, but I know a man who is. So Roy, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the invite.
No problems. So we've had some niches on here, Roy, but this is an incredibly specialist feed. So, it would be interesting for the listeners to get a little bit of background into how you've actually got to where you are today, because it's about as niche as you can get, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. And so my journey in the arb industry started in the late 1990s. I'm not an arb consultant, but the company I was working for at the time were importing a product from America called Geoweb.
Oh, right.
And Geoweb was designed by the US Army in conjunction with our manufacturers to stabilise weak ground to get military equipment across it very, very quickly. Mm. And the company I worked for at the time, a company in Bolton by the name of Cooper Clark, there's a name from the past for our older listeners.
Yeah, I can just about remember that one.
Yeah, they imported Geoweb from America. Now, Geoweb's got a lot of applications. The main one was building roads over weak grounds. Mm. And we were approached by an arb consultant in about 1995 to have a look at a situation where APN1 was currently in use, which was a geogrid and a geotextile, but it used quite a lot of stone. So the company Cooper Clark did a trial using Geoweb to replace the geogrid and geotextile, and that's where the whole three-dimensional cellular confinement, if you like, interest and history started from in the arb market, in the arb world. So from there we approached all the arb consultants in the UK, every tree officer in the UK, and we basically told them that we got a different solution to APN1, which was the only document really at the time, in BS 5837, of course. And that's when I started to talk to arb consultants and tree officers and tree surgeons and landscape architects about trees and tree protection and making sure we didn't lose trees on development sites. And 25 years later, I'm still involved in it, and I still love it because the industry's such a friendly industry to work in. Yeah. And at the end of the day, we are providing a very important, vital solution to make sure we don't lose our existing tree stock when we want to develop sites. There's
certainly nothing more satisfying than seeing a cellular confinement system that has been installed properly. It's something our head office is up in Inverness in the Highlands of Scotland, and it's something you don't see very often up here. In fact, every time I see a track or a pathway through a mature woodland, one of the very first things I do, and I was doing this at the weekend with my partner, driving her mad, is start scratching away with my foot to see if there's actually a cellular confinement system underneath there, and sadly the answer was no. So I guess with the audience in mind, Roy, before we dive into this a little bit further, explain exactly what a cellular confinement system is and why it would be used.
Perfect. So a cellular confinement system is a honeycomb structure that is manufactured from strips of plastic, and the depth of those strips vary from 75 mil, 100 mil, 150 mil, 200 mil, and 300 mil. Those strips are then welded together. A number of strips are welded together, and they create a mattress. And that mattress has been designed, and the cell shape and diameter has been designed to increase the strength of the fill that you put inside it. So when you're looking at a load-bearing situation, such as a road over very weak ground, the idea is that a load that is put on the stone-filled Geoweb will distribute the load across the mattress, reducing the impact that load would have on the surface and, more importantly, the subsoil below. So it reduces the vertical impact of loadings from all types of vehicles. And because we use free draining clean stone, it's free draining and acts as a complete porous pavement system. So the confinement element is that the granular fill is confined in the pockets within the mattress.
Yeah.
When you apply a load vertically, the stone wants to move, as all stone will, but it hits the cell walls that have been created by welding the strips together. It can't go anywhere, so you get what's called a reverse reaction to that load, and that's where you get the load spread from.
Excellent. And I guess in relation to trees, and the reason that it's used so much, not only to relieve compaction or alleviate compaction, but also it's the whole excavation side of it as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So that's for the listeners. Most tree roots reside in the top 50 to 60 centimetres of soil, and it's the thin fibrous tree roots that are responsible for gaseous exchange, so moisture and oxygen going up and down between the tree's roots and the tree's crown. So any excavation in that top kind of half a metre of soil can be have a very detrimental effect on the long-term life expectancy of the tree, which is why a product like a cellular confinement system might be used for your path or your driveway to get across the tree's root protection area, which is what we're trying to achieve, isn't it?
It is, and the testing we carried out back in the 90s was all live testing on soils, basically. And a major consulting engineer at the time, I'm sure they're still in practice, company called Halcro, did some live testing where they applied loads to different thicknesses of different geowebs on soils to ascertain what depth of geoweb would be required for what type of soil condition against certain loadings. So it's a complete no-dig. We don't excavate any of the ground. We can put the geoweb straight on top of a geotextile fabric. Sometimes, depending on the tree officer involved or the local authority involved, they may allow a small bit of hand dig to take off vegetation, but that's not necessarily required. You can literally put the geotextile fabric on the existing grass, put your geoweb over the top, fill it with the stone. Obviously, we help. Where we come in the design process, I suppose, is that we deal with arboricultural consultants like yourselves, lots of others around the country. We deal direct with people who have been told that they need a geocellular confinement system for the driveway, and we'll design it direct for them and supply it direct for them. Obviously, previously, they may have spoken to somebody like yourselves. And then we, from all that information and 25 years of live projects, we've done thousands and thousands of projects in the UK.
Yeah.
There are thousands of developments that have been granted planning permission, not just because of the tree protection scheme, but obviously it forms part of the very important planning application. Yes. How we're going to protect these existing trees. So we get involved from day one with people like yourselves. We'll provide you the design information. You incorporate that into your arboricultural report, and we do everything else.
Yeah, I mean, certainly one of the things we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, in particular during the COVID situation, is that planning applications are being more and more front-loaded now. So whereas we might put a very brief comment in that we've identified a path or a drive or some sort of hard surfacing is going to be within a tree's root protection area, and we believe it to be tolerable if a cellular confinement system is used. And that kind of statement was, up until a number of years ago, was generally fine for an arboricultural impact assessment and a tree survey to get the planning application validated and along the road a bit. But what we found now is that the applications are starting to be more and more front-loaded towards providing the arboricultural method statement and tree protection plan up front, which means the knock-on is that our clients, and by design our listeners to this podcast, are having to really deep dive into this and put a lot of information in very, very early in the process, post-planning usually. Does that kind of mirror with what you've experienced over the last couple of years?
It's certainly more recently, yes. But we have, again, we can only call upon the experience we've got, and we have. So 25 years of doing this with planners, tree officers, arboricultural consultants, clients direct. We've got an absolute wealth of information, standard information that we can provide people at early planning, even before early planning, that can help them and yourselves, get that initial kind of approval granted.
I mean, certainly with residential schemes, Roy, it would be lovely to think that they got us involved early enough that we could provide that information. But nearly always they've submitted their planning application, and then it comes back as invalid because of the tree issues and the things that we've been discussing here. So there's two things that I wanted to ask you about that pop up all the time. And the first one is relatively simple, and there's three things. The first one is edge retention. So from a practical perspective, what options have clients got when it comes to actually retaining the geocell? Because in some circumstances, like we've been involved with projects with the National Trust, for instance, putting roadways into temporary car parks and things, and quite often a timber retention system is fine there. But what sort of options have people got open to them, particularly if it's domestic and they're looking for something a little bit more attractive?
It's a great question, and it's one we get asked all the time. And of course, for footpaths, treated timber board's fine. Yeah. We actually have a recycled plastic timber lookalike board as well, which is just pegged into place. You could use the Everedge type steel edging. Right. And what we've done on quite a few projects more recently, albeit larger commercial projects, we've actually cast a concrete curb into the Geoweb. Right. So it's a much hard-wearing, robust edging detail. So what we would do, we take the geotextile underlay beyond the Geoweb. We have a bit of shuttering. We cast some concrete in just into the end cell of the Geoweb panels, and then we sit the curbs in there. And I've got some photographs of a project we did in Bath 2 or 3 years ago. And if you have a new residential site of say 10, 15, 20 plots, for instance, you're going to have a lot of construction traffic driving up the new access road. If we've got a Geoweb access road in there, you've got to get delivery vehicles in. You've got to get site equipment in. You may have to get a crane in. With a timber board, it only needs the HGV to hit that once, and it's probably going to topple over or start breaking up. So we were asked to look at, obviously, coming up with a way of integrating a concrete edge, and it can be done. There's no leaching of the concrete into the soil because the geotextile stops that. And it is a very robust system. So you can edge it with absolutely anything you want. Timber, recycled plastic timber, steel edging, and concrete curbs.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That will definitely provide some useful thought for people. And then following on from there, which is probably also something that gets talked about an awful lot. I know the answers to this, obviously, but again, for the benefit of the listeners, surfacing options. So obviously you've got the infill with the clean stone. Everybody's seen the pictures of Geoweb installed over a geotextile. You can see the shape of the membrane there, the black membrane. You can see you can see the stone infill, but obviously that's from a residential perspective, and certainly from high-end residential perspective, that's not what you want as your finished driveway. So, what sort of options have people got? What would be common to be used?
Again, they can use anything. The key is the whole design rather than just the individual layers. So we can use standard asphalt or tarmac, porous tarmac. We can use resin-bound gravel because there are some systems on the market now, the resin-bound gravels that are very porous. We can use block paving, standard block paving or free draining porous block paving, porous concrete if we needed to. We could use plastic grids filled with grass or gravel, and we have a full range of plastic pavers that you can, as I said, either have a grass driveway or a gravel driveway, and the plastic grid holds it all in place. Obviously, as having a porous, almost a porous pavement in the Geoweb, you want a porous surface.
Absolutely, yeah.
A lot of local authorities like asphalt, so porous asphalt is perfect. Yes. But all asphalt, even standard asphalt, is porous to a degree. So you can literally surface the Geoweb with any type of surfacing that obviously that aesthetically the client's looking to have.
And would you need a specialist surfacing contractor to carry that out, or would you say there's sufficient knowledge out there now that they're familiar with a GeoCell system, and that surfacing over the top of that doesn't present them with any particular challenges?
We send out with every delivery to every client a full installation method statement, right. And that method statement covers every potential type of surfacing option. So everything's covered.
That's brilliant.
With regards to asphalt, the ground workers will probably have their own asphalting company they use. You can put the tarmac straight on top of the filled web. It won't affect the web. The hot asphalt will not melt the Geoweb, so there's no issue with that. And then everything else is just, again, a ground worker would have people who could lay block paving, people who could lay plastic paving. So the only specialist possibly would be if it was resin-bound gravel. Right,
okay. That's really, really interesting. And what I will do off the back of this, we'll get some resources off of you, and we'll link those up to the podcast as well, so that people can go and dig that information out for themselves. And something else that comes up, Roy, and there's nearly always a lot of backwards and forwards in with the tree officer to bottom this out, and with the design team as well, is that we've had a few projects just recently, and particularly during COVID, where people have installed a garden building of some sort that has either a driveway or a path going to it. Now, the building itself might be installed on mini piles, or screw piles, so that it's sitting clear of the root protection area. So you've got, in some cases, quite a substantial level difference between the garage and the existing surface. What would be normal as a way of overcoming that, to get your levels right, to come from your GeoCell up into a garage? Because that's something that comes up all the time and seems to stump architects as to what the technical solution would be there.
Yeah, it's levels with Geoweb and trees is really, really an important issue, and you touched on something here probably you possibly weren't meaning to. What we have to remember is the whole point of a GeoCell for root protection is to spread the load so that it doesn't compact the soil underneath.
Yeah.
That's basically, and it be free draining. They're the key elements. We don't need to, or we don't want to be changing the condition of the soil to the extent where it's going to damage the roots. So building great levels up of stone in layers of GSL is not a great idea, because what you're doing actually is putting dead weight on the tree root or the tree roots. But where we have got a small rise, for me, a garden shed or an office shed, the perfect base for that would be 100 mil Geoweb. It's perfect, and you can kind of level out the ground underneath if you needed to by adding a bit of stone on top of the geotextile before we put the Geoweb down, then put your base or your building straight on top of the web.
That's interesting, because we've literally just specified that this morning for a small kiosk here in Inverness that is going on a heavily compacted matrix of grass within the root protection area of several kind of Class A lime trees, and it was the only option. So that's exactly what they're doing in that case. So yeah, that's interesting.
And then all you can do to increase the levels is what I tend to tell people: if it's edged, if the pathway is edged, and we need to come up from 0 to 100 mil to meet the garage, if you like, if it's sat on 100 mil web plus the base, is to grade some stone first underneath the Geoweb before we put the Geoweb on top.
Right.
To try, if you build up layers of web, you've almost got to build them up parallel with each other. So the easiest way to create that gradient is to, as I said, use the same stone as you're putting inside the web, under the web, to create your ramp, if that's the right word. Obviously, less 100 mil or whatever depth of web we're needing for the traffic to then get up to the edge of the garage. No,
that makes perfect sense. And you're being very generous with your time, Roy.
No problem.
There's one other thing that I want to ask you about, and you might decline to comment on this particular one, but are all cellular confinement systems created equal, or is there real variability out there now? And the reason I ask that is that yes, obviously you're going to say that your system is a good system, and I get that, but from our listeners' perspective, they are potentially, this is a significant cost, or it's a significant element of their project, and it might be an element that they weren't particularly aware of. It's certainly something they weren't planning for in the vast majority of cases, and it's potentially one of the areas that they may think that, look, do you know what, actually we're going to go for the cheapest possible solution here, whop it in, nobody's going to care. What are the pitfalls out there?
Perfect, great question. So if I could just go back in time slightly, back in 2005, BS 5837 was being revised, and I actually spoke with the guys who were revising that document to help them include GSLs, or cellular confinement system, for the very first time into BS 5837.
Yeah.
If you move forward to APN 12, APN 12 has now not outlawed, that's probably a strong word, but have basically banned the use of two-dimensional reinforcement systems for building areas over tree roots. Okay. Move that one step further on. There's an update to APN 12 that actually indicates that Geoweb and one other, which I won't name, but Geoweb and another product really are the two products that you should use when doing anything around tree roots that require a new hard surface being installed. So, again, I'll go back in history. Geoweb is the original cellular confinement system invented by the US Army. They contacted our manufacturers, because the US Army were making the product out of aluminium, believe it or not, in the 70s. It cost an absolute fortune. Presto Geosystems, who manufactured Geoweb, produced the plastic version, and the rest is literally history. So every other GSL that's on the market is a copy of Geoweb.
Right, okay.
But that's not to say there aren't some decent copies.
Yes.
But every other one is a copy. And and this is why I'm going to be completely honest, and I've actually developed 2 or 3 other ones. So, there are some good products out there. But the key things to understand are, one, the diameter of the cell is important, because the bigger the diameter of the cell, the deeper the pocket the Geoweb or the GSL needs to be. So we're looking around no bigger than a 320mm GSL or cell diameter. You're then looking at the weld strength, because these are just strips of plastic welded together to create a honeycomb mattress. The strength of that weld is important, because if that weld fails, you then are opening up the pockets. And as I've just said, the bigger the pocket, the deeper the product needs to be, because you're not getting the same load strength through.
Yeah.
It's got to be textured, because the texturing on the product helps grip with the clean stone that we put inside, and it's really important that the right stone is used. The web is only one component of a successful protection system. It includes the geotextiles and the clean stone. It should be perforated so that you get lateral interlock of the granular material, as well as lateral flow of water. And we have a couple of patented, unique ancillaries with our product that make the installation easier and quicker and guarantees a longer term performance. So the products I would avoid are products that have big cells, 400mm diameter cells, products that are not perforated or textured. I think there are some products made from geotextile. I'm not sure they're actually, if you read the latest APN 12, I think there's advice there not to use that type of geocell. And speak to the people who know what they're doing and are interested in this industry, and not just interested in selling a product. And I've been doing this since 1997. Very fortunate at the time to get introduced to these types of products, and they've stuck with me ever since. So I'm not saying we're the only company. We're not. There are a couple of others that do it properly, but Geoweb is the original product, and we have the most prolific engineering backup support in America if we need it, which we generally don't, but if we do, we provide, as I said, site-specific method statements. I go to sites to have a look before, during, and after to make sure everything's okay. So we care about the industry. We don't just care about the products.
Yeah, and then that's key. It's the whole value proposition thing, isn't it? At the end of the day, if their roadway, if their path fails at some point in the future because of an inferior product, the knock-on effect of that is massive. It can create all sorts of problems. I can just imagine cells failing and potholes forming and all sorts of nightmares. I mean, certainly from our perspective, there's only two products that we recommend within our reports as well, and Geoweb's one of them. So, but Roy, you've been great with your time. You've been great with the information. It's really, really useful to deep dive into this a little bit, because it is something that gets specified with massive frequency. And what would be great would be, just as we wrap up, really, just be if you could let people know how they can reach you and get in contact with you.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. So it's Roy Partington, and my email address is roy@greenfix.co.uk. I'm on LinkedIn if anybody would like to connect with me on LinkedIn. The company website is just www.greenfix.co.uk, and I'll not give my mobile number out.
No, don't do that.
I'm sure everything's actually fine.
Yeah, protect your sanity, protect your time. Yeah, otherwise you'll be phoned up left, right, and centre. It's really interesting to speak to you, Roy. It's a fascinating niche, and thanks a lot for coming on the show. And I'll pop all Roy's details at the bottom in the show notes, and anybody that wants to get in contact with Roy can reach out. So thanks a lot, Roy. Thanks for coming on,
Thanks,
and
Matt.
we will speak to you soon. Cheers now.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.